few years ago, we were fortunate to have a holiday in northern Spain. We packed up the car, we packed up the kids, and we drove from our home in Yorkshire down to Plymouth, where we got the ferry to Santander. When we arrived at the port, we realised that we had no map. All we did have were some directions from the holiday company, and so we set out in trust and confidence. We followed them, and after about an hour of driving we arrived. It was very rural. There wasn't the sight of a shop or much other civilization in sight. I felt my anxiety levels rise. Needed some reassurance. What I really needed was a map. On the night before he died, Jesus had supper with his friends. An act, the Passover meal, which would have been very familiar to them. But what happened next took them into some unfamiliar territory. He insisted on washing his disciples' feet, which offended at least one of them. He then instructed them on the model of servant leadership, which was and remains still countercultural. He then told them that one of his friends, one of this band of brothers, would betray him, and that the rest would abandon him. This was indeed new territory for them. They were anxious. Perhaps they wanted a map. Do not let your hearts be troubled, Jesus said to his disciples. That's the start of a reading that's often said at funeral services. Jesus' words, his talk that his Father's house has many dwelling places, provides comfort, reassurance, joy even, in the new territory of bereavement. The promise that we will enjoy eternal rest with God. The promise that we will pass through the gate of death and follow Jesus into resurrection life. But life after death is not really what this passage, which begins with "Do not let your hearts be troubled," is really about. When Jesus says, "I am the way," it does beg the question, the way to what? And to begin to answer that question, we surely must focus on Jesus' life and teaching. Something he referred to again and again as the kingdom of God. And this teaching is not focused on life after death, but on life before death. If you're interested in this life before death, which Jesus calls the kingdom of God, then you must surely be interested in the things, or more so the people, that Jesus was interested in. Generally the most unlovable, the most confused, the most misguided. Jesus was interested in helping these people, perhaps people like us, to know and to learn about a loving God. To know love and to love in return. If you want to know the way to this place, this kingdom of God, this life before death, then Jesus says, follow him. Believe in him. Put your trust and your confidence in him. Depending on your starting point, this might seem like a big ask. But because we're all created in God's image, at least part of our instinct to follow this life before death is inbuilt. Going back to our holiday in Spain for a moment, we didn't have a map, but our car did have an inbuilt compass. And so after we got settled, we followed it due north, the direction where we knew the coast was. And before long we came across a town with a shop and a map. This coronavirus pandemic that we're all experiencing has propelled us all into some new territory. For most, I guess, this is uncomfortable. What to do and how to be. We'd like some reassurance. Perhaps we'd like a map. Well, of course, the problem with maps is that territory changes and maps become out of date. One of the features of our current territory is the networks of mutual support that have sprung up in response to the pandemic. In the midst of crisis, we are beginning to rely on others more. Our neighbours, our church friends, other organisations, online communities even. We're beginning to rely on these more for physical, for emotional, and for psychological support. And this reliance, this reaching out, looks similar to the communities that Jesus spoke of when he talked about the kingdom of God. We haven't got a map, but perhaps we're following our inbuilt compass. Maybe, just maybe, we're on the way. Amen.